Hey everyone, this is Paul Gale from paulgalenetwork.com, and thank you for joining me today for video game news. It is August 24th, 2020, and these are the top stories of the day. To get things started, let's take a look at the Splatfest results. As you can see, Team Chicken has defeated Team Egg. So go Chicken! That's where I was, Team Chicken. It was a fun Splatfest. Nintendo obviously revisited this heated rivalry this time around, and Chicken won. And had a good amount of battles. I'm looking forward to the next few Splatfests throughout the rest of the year and into early 2021. And honestly hope that Nintendo continues with Splatfests more regularly, at least until Splatoon 3 comes out. But for now, that was fun, and I hope you had a good time playing as well. Now, speaking of Splatoon, the next thing I wanted to talk about today is something not too dissimilar, and that is Ninjala. Ninjala released on Nintendo Switch as a free downloadable eShop title this past June. It's a 4 versus 4 multiplayer online game. And now covering your territory with ink is not the name of the game. It's more of a battle royale style game, but it still has a fun, pretty colorful, cute art style, lots of different specials and supers, good level design, and a pretty fun title overall. But in particular, today's news is that there seems to be a Sonic the Hedgehog crossover with Ninjala that's being planned for the not too distant future. So I would keep my eyes peeled on that, and obviously I will report on it when I get any more information. But stay tuned to seeing some type of Sonic the Hedgehog presence in Ninjala. And I think that's kind of cool because it's a fun new IP, and I don't mind seeing some collaborations with older IP to help the new guys out a little bit, Next up in video game news is the announcement from Geoff Keighley that the Game Awards will be returning in 2021. Now, the Game Awards have been going on for several years, and I think that they're getting better and better in quality. I've met Geoff Keighley several times over the last 20 years or so worth of going to E3. The last time we met, I think, was in 2018, if not 2019's E3. In June at the LA Convention Center, and he's really cool. I'm always in good support of his work. I appreciate what he does, whether it was in his G4 TV days or really the last several years with the Game Awards and making it a better and better show, delivering some good content, a good amount of variety in terms of new games and awards given to developers, and it's overall solid. So I look forward to seeing that in a new form in 2021. It'll be some type of, online show, of course, due to the quarantine and pandemic happening worldwide. And I still think that should be positive. Obviously, he said we're not going to have 10,000 people in a stadium, this time around. That's not the goal, but it could still be achieved if you have developers working together to have certain things shown, know the kind of trailers that you want to have shown to the demographic, where to cut, where to put in and out, an intro, outro, different guest celebrities taking their time to speak to one another, to speak to us, whether it's on Zoom or a different format, if they partner up with YouTube or Twitch or have it be available across all streaming networks, that all remains to be seen, but it could definitely work. And I have a little bit of a feeling that what they're going with is kind of how I would have handled E3 2020. It's actually what I pitched to the ESA for E3 2020, that when it was announced in March that it was not going to happen anymore, that you could still have it work online with social distancing measures and masks in protocol, communicate with different developers ahead of time, have this E3 digital event where developers, whether it's from Nintendo, Konami, Sega, Capcom, Microsoft, etc., reveal their trailers, have a little bit of an announcement, cut away to the next one, and it could be like a week-long thing where you're giving different people different sections of time to tune in, and that way you can still have hashtag E3 2020 trending on Twitter and stuff. But obviously that didn't happen, but it was a good idea. I think this will be even more well put together than that thought, because the Game Awards has already had great success in streaming online to big crowds, because even though it is a show that happens at a stadium, yes, the meat and potatoes of it really is what gets seen by how many people around the world. And I have good faith that Geoff Keighley and co. will deliver well on this. So I'm looking forward to the Game Awards 2021, and you'll have to let me know in the comments, are you looking forward to it? And what do you think they'll show off? And what are you looking forward to? This is the event, after all, that we got some heavy hitters like Bayonetta 3 and saw some Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild footage. So good stuff comes from Game Awards. Mortal Kombat 11 did too. New Final Fantasy 7 footage. Xbox Series X. The list goes on and on. So here's the 2021. Let me know what you think. Oh, here's the 2020's show, I should say. And hopefully by 2021, the show will come back to a normal means of a healthier world and being able to be there, because nothing quite beats the experience of being in a crowd, And that brings me to the last game of gaming news today, and that is the rumors circulating online of a new Nintendo Switch model coming out in 2021. The rumors suggest from Taipei that the unit will have an improved display, better quality, perhaps a 1080p screen, but that's speculative on my part. It will enter production in late 2020. It will have an upgraded interactivity method of some sort. Could that be different controls, new Joy-Con? I don't know. And yeah, that's about it. Now, we've heard rumors of a Nintendo Switch Plus or Nintendo Switch Pro for many months. In fact, probably as soon as the Nintendo Switch came out, people were beginning to speculate, okay, is Nintendo going to do a Pro model, a Plus model, a 2 model? What's the next thing going to be for the system? And the more and more successful Nintendo was with Nintendo Switch, the more months that went by, the more games that began coming to it, third-party stuff, third-party games doing well, whether it was Doom, Ultra Street Fighter 2, The Final Challengers, Wolfenstein 2, Dragon Ball FighterZ. More and more games started coming, and we started to see that, dang, this is a strong platform. It really is something special that Nintendo created, because it satisfies the need for many to have a next-gen home console that's capable of producing nice graphics on screen on their TVs at home and play a good amount of titles available that are third-party efforts. Is a nice console to have your Nintendo exclusives. It became a great platform to play a load of titles from the Wii U era, and is continuously getting new titles from the Wii U era that a lot of people missed, like Pikmin 3, and all of that while also being able to be completely portable and taken on the go. And that's really the biggest feature of this system, is that Switch nature, right? Hence the name, Nintendo Switch. Ironically, with the exception of the Nintendo Switch Lite. But that's something else entirely. And I think that a lot of people began to look at this and thought, Nintendo got it. Why break the mold now? It looks so strong. Its software lineup is so compelling. It really has hooked with a lot of people. But what's next? I think a Nintendo Switch 2 is inevitable, but that seems like a long way out. And, when Nintendo Switch released back in March 2017, it was coming, a little over 3.5 years after the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Coming out that much later allowed Nintendo to catch up in technology to have roughly that technology that's in the PS4 and Xbox One in a system this big, in a tablet. Now you can say that, well, the Nintendo Switch isn't capable with as quite of high a fidelity of graphics and resolution, frame rate as other platforms, but for the most part, if you see Doom running on any platform, you see the Nintendo Switch as a very competent version. Some games have very little difference, like the like the Spyro the Dragon Reignited trilogy, or Crash Team Racing, or the Crash Bandicoot trilogy, or Dragon Ball FighterZ. There are some games that have a little bit more distinguished difference in visual fidelity, such as Mortal Kombat 11. but completely capable, completely running on the platform. However, now Nintendo Switch is in an interesting position because as big of a wow factor as it is for most people of, wow, I get to play this beautiful looking game in just slightly less beautiful looking graphics on this little platform that I can also take on the go. That's still attractive. However, as the new platforms are coming out, 3.5 years later now, Nintendo Switch being right in the middle, right? From when Xbox One and PS4 came out to now the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. Once again, about 3.5 more years are passing this time after Nintendo Switch. And the greater, there'll be a greater difference in visuals, you know? Now, you don't want to beat Nintendo and be left behind when the new guys are coming out with their new games, because there will be games that come out exclusively on PS5 and Xbox Series X that don't come out on Xbox One, on PS4, or on Nintendo Switch. Switch was already, technically speaking, the weakest platform of those three, but it worked because it was a newer system, had more modern parts, and they squeezed it just right to make it work with the majority of, you know, those other platforms' games. But as we approach the future, you know, looking at something like Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, that's a big title that's coming out in 2022. It's still 2 years out, but we already know it's not going to run on the PS4 or the Xbox One, and those are already more powerful platforms than the Nintendo Switch in most fields. So, reason to expect that game's not coming on Switch. Nintendo Switch will slowly begin to lose more and more of its appeal as more and more games end up skipping it. Now, fortunately, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One are still strong enough systems and are still selling well enough that developers aren't just going to jump ship into next generation consoles immediately, but you will begin to see the difference. And so too, Nintendo Switch's library will slowly start to get smaller as new titles are in development exclusively for those other two and for PC market, of course. And you could also say, even if developers found a way how to make it work and released Xbox One, PS4, Nintendo Switch versions of these otherwise intended to be next-gen games, now the difference in quality is much more significant, you know? Now it's not just, oh, I could play the Nintendo Switch version of this third-party multi-platform game that's on Xbox One and PS4, just in 720p or 900p and at 30 frames per second instead of 1080p, 60 frames per second. It's not just that difference anymore, which a lot of people are okay with. Now it's, oof, that game's missing a lot of textures. It's missing a lot of frames. It's dipping, it's chunking down. It's got a really low resolution in handheld mode, worse than TV mode. It's almost unplayable. It's broken. Like, at that point, certain games that are made with the intention of being these next-gen consoles, you know, powerful, hardware boasting games, it's going to be either something that's barely runnable on these current platforms or just get skipped at all. So, Nintendo's got to do something. They have to do a couple of things. One, they need to keep Nintendo in the public eye by doing big moves to take away some of the eyes, some of that curiosity that comes with buying a new console. And they need to make their platform look attractive and capable. Those are a couple of different things. They could take the eye away from people wanting to buy a new console, such as an Xbox Series X or a PlayStation 5, this fall. They could surprise us. Now, I don't know how likely this is, but they could surprise us with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 that comes out early November, just a week or so before PS5 or Xbox Series X. They could release a Mario Kart 9. Again, like I'm saying, not likely to happen, but release some type of heavy hitter that you bundle that with a Nintendo Switch current model and release it into the market, temporarily lower the price of the normal SKUs, and you're looking at a $360, $330 system with this phenomenal game versus these $500, $600 entries that have good games, but nothing as great or as big in scope as a Breath of the Wild 2 or a Mario Kart 9. That's how Nintendo could still win the holidays and get more people to buy a Switch than Xbox Series X or PlayStation 5, because there's a lot of excitement with new platforms, naturally. But the other thing they could do, which ideally would be in addition to what I just mentioned, is that come March next year, and that's, I think, a nice time and a reasonable time to expect a new hardware revision would be, let's say hypothetically, March 2021, Nintendo releases the Nintendo Switch Plus, a more powerful Nintendo Switch. 1080p screen instead of a 720p screen, giving itself bumped up visual fidelity, more RAM, faster CPU, better quality GPU, perhaps a dock that does more than translate the signal and allows the system to overclock at a higher hertz rate on the TV, but actually does a little bit of a GPU boost so that when you're playing on screen, whether it's going to 1440p or 4K possibly, although the latter doesn't seem too likely, but keeping things smooth, maybe guaranteeing that 60 frames per second is the intended mark, and perhaps giving a boost to older titles. Now, developers would have to go in and make that happen, but there's a lot of mystery behind it. Just what it would do. First of all, is it even coming out? But if it does come out, just what it would do. You don't want to necessarily alienate the existing 62 million large Nintendo Switch market by releasing a more powerful platform that, if you want to play, certain games, they could only run on the Nintendo Switch Plus. Because that's a strategy that has sometimes occurred. There were some Game Boy Color games back in the day that were intended for the Game Boy Color, would not run on the Game Boy, despite all Game Boy games running on the Game Boy Color, Or, to a lesser example, on 3DS, the jump between 3DS and 3DS XL, 3DS XL, or I should say new 3DS rather, new 3DS did have a few games that only ran on it. Some games ran better, but it did have a select few that only ran on it, and it was the place to go to if you wanted to play Super Nintendo games via Virtual Console. But for the most part, platforms, when they have a mid-gen refresh, they don't offer exclusive games. In the history of gaming, that doesn't happen too often. But it does, and I don't think Nintendo should alienate the existing user base. Now, regardless, I will buy a new Nintendo Switch, a Nintendo Switch Pro, a Nintendo Switch Plus, whatever it's called. But I'm very curious how most people would feel. If it is a 1080p unit, that itself is pretty attractive. If it does offer a greater resolution and a more rock-steady frame rate to existing games, somehow, that's also more attractive. If it somehow allows the Nintendo Switch to exist and have some games come out for it that wouldn't otherwise, that's great. But then you run into the problem. How does the large market feel about Mortal Kombat 12 in development for Xbox One and PlayStation 4, Xbox Series X, PlayStation 5, and Nintendo Switch Plus, but doesn't run on Nintendo Switch? How would people feel if Mortal Kombat 12, or more likely possibly Injustice 3, runs on all of those, but not the base Nintendo Switch? That wouldn't be a good move. What would be better, though, but this is a big if the system could be powerful enough to run these games that wouldn't otherwise appear on Switch, but Nintendo would mandate that, no, your game has to be able to run on the base Switch but it will be allowable to be ran in a very compromised mode. Now, ideally, Nintendo would have developers make a whole separate SKU designed for the Switch, but that's not going to happen for all these games because games cost a lot of money, and you know it's one thing for NetherRealm Studios to have Injustice 3 and scalable versions of basically the same game running at 4K textures and 60 frames per second on these consoles. Okay, on this one it's only at 720p and 30, but it's the same game. It's another thing building a whole other SKU of Injustice 3, Mortal Kombat 12, whatever. I'm just using those two as an example right now, just to run on the weakest system, Nintendo Switch. I don't see that happening, which probably Nintendo wouldn't mind though, because that makes the existing Switch still equally attractive, right? You don't have to upgrade to a new system. You could use your old system to play all of these games that are coming out on other platforms, but that's just not a realistic, likely scenario. Instead, could you get some poor quality versions of these games? And okay, it's running at 640p docked, 480p in handheld mode, 30 frames per second, but yep, it still runs, it's still there, it's still technically sharing the same library as the Nintendo Switch Plus. But let's be honest, at this point, if you're wanting to play these intended for next-gen platform games, or even games running on Xbox One and PS4 that come out in the next couple of years that are going to be some pretty heavy system pushers, if you want to play them in handheld mode or on Nintendo Switch in general, really you should be upgrading to a Nintendo Switch Plus. That's kind of the best and most likely scenario that I could think of. It's just, at what point is a game too poor in quality that it's almost not worth even having on the base system, but still important enough to technically have so you don't truly alienate the user base, It's exciting. It's exciting to think what's going to happen, but regardless, a Nintendo Switch Plus is what I said earlier. It's a powerful reminder of the world that, hey, we have, once again, the newest platform on the market, because the newest thing gets talked about the most. It's the most exciting thing. Nintendo, they started Generation 9 with the Nintendo Switch, because whether you like it or not, whether you want to admit that it's, deserving of a next generation title, it is. It's the start of Gen 9. Generation 8 consisted of 3DS and PS Vita, Wii U, PS3, and Xbox One. Nintendo Switch is the beginning of Gen 9. Now, how do you define generations? Something to do with time based on when something comes out and the technology prowess, the developments over a predecessor. That's kind of the generational definition. It's a hybrid, if you will, of both things. You could say that, no, Nintendo Switch isn't more powerful than a PS4 or an Xbox One, so how could it be next gen? If you're saying just based off of power, then you would say, well, then the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X are also next gen. They're also Gen 9 because they're more powerful than the Switch. And one of those two came out after the Switch. But what Switch didn't do to advance the hardware market in terms of graphical, visual fidelity, game sophistication from a CPU standpoint, etc., it evolved the console market by allowing physical console hardware to be played on the TV and on the go. So it's not just a 9th gen with an asterisk console that's a portable console. No, it deserves to be called a 9th gen console. It is the beginning. The next 9th gen consoles to come out are going to be the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. But still, it puts Nintendo in an interesting position because you want to be the talk of the town. You don't want to get lost in the console wars, because as much as these companies say that they don't compete with each other directly when it comes to, games, let's be honest, everybody wants to have the top selling games, the top selling system, the most amount of subscribers, the most amount of people buying their controllers, talking about them on Twitter, hashtagging up everything, right? That's it at the end of the day. It's a money-driven business. Console wars are real. Generations are real. And it's exciting to see what Nintendo's going to do with this. I don't think that Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 is coming out this fall, but I wouldn't be entirely surprised. As long as Nintendo has something for fall 2020, whether it is the Mario 35th Anniversary Collection, and it's just a beautiful, stunning package of remade versions of Galaxy, Sunshine, and 64, and a nice Super Mario 3D World Deluxe, and a Pikmin 3 Deluxe, and one other title that's kind of a surprise that came out of left field. That could be good for 2020. And in 2021, you've got this awesome rollout of Breath of the Wild 2 being released in March 2021 with Nintendo Switch Plus. Enjoy the game on both platforms, Switch and Switch Plus, but the Switch Plus version is definitely the higher fidelity, visual, frame rate, badass experience that you want in a Zelda game. That's the platform to go with. And throughout that year, release your Bayonetta 3, and potentially by the end of 2021, Metroid Prime 4, we'll see. But that's too much discussion and too much derailing. I really just wanted to give my thoughts on Nintendo Switch Plus. Do I think it's a thing? And when do I think it's coming out? I think it is a thing. I don't think Nintendo's going to let a whole 6 years go without releasing anything, because they want to make a movement and they don't want to fall too far behind the arms race. They're finally at an awesome place where they have an industry-changing, game-changing piece of hardware like Wii was, but has really cemented itself in to a hardcore demographic. Whereas Wii expanded the industry a lot, its capabilities in terms of third party of people were a lot more limited to what Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 could do than what Nintendo Switch could do compared to PS4 and Xbox One. Nintendo has narrowed the gap a lot in terms of power for those, respective generations. And yeah, I lumped in Nintendo Switch in this current generation of PS4 and Xbox One, but that's only because time-wise, we have yet to see exactly what PS5 and Xbox Series X are capable of. But we do know they're going to be much more competent, much more powerful machines, and Nintendo doesn't want to fall behind there. But that also brings up another question of, okay, how long does Nintendo wait before releasing a Nintendo Switch 2? Could they, by November 2023, release a Nintendo Switch 2 that is, 6.5 years beyond that of Switch, 2.5 years beyond that of the Nintendo Switch Plus, and it be powerful enough of a system that it could handle the vast majority of everything that's coming out on PS5 and Xbox Series X or S, because it's kind of like the rumored specs of a Series S, but dialed back a bit and released as this hybrid console handheld and thus start Generation 10? Or are people going to lump it in as a Gen 9? I don't know. But this isn't really talking about generations and whether something is an 8, a 9, or a 10. That's not the most important thing here. That's more of a fanboy argument that people have, and you're on one side or another. But at least if people are providing reasons for why, that's what makes the argument compelling one way or another. But anyways, this talk ended up going from dropping a little bit of news on reports coming out of Taipei from a manufacturing plant supposedly beginning to develop an advanced, more powerful Nintendo Switch model end of this year in plans for an early 2020 release. Went from that to really doing a deep dive into my thoughts on the whole ecosystem of the video game industry. But it was fun. I love talking about the landscape of gaming. Hope you had a fun time watching. Sound off in the comments below what you thought of the Splatfest, what you think of the Sonic and Ninjala crossover, what do you think of video games in general, and the Game Awards. Are you looking forward to Geoff Keighley's latest in 2020, this December or so? And what do you think about the whole Nintendo Switch Plus talk? All right, everybody. This is Paul Gale from PaulGaleNetwork.com signing out. If you are joining me new and are interested in hearing me talk more on games, I appreciate any kind of like, subscription, follow, etc. I appreciate it all. If not, and you dislike the video, no harm done either. But thanks again, and remember, when we hit 3,000 subscribers, I am doing a $20 eShop giveaway. All right, thanks again. Have a good day. See you tomorrow.